The Beatles broke up in 1970, so why did Capitol release Love Songs 7 years later? Was it just another cash-in? In this video, I want to answer the question, was it made for love or money? The Beatles have an interesting history as they were only together for a short period of time in the 1960s, but they left a lasting impression on the music scene. Let me tell you how I remember listening to the Beatles when I was younger. I grew up in the US in the 70s. The Beatles were one of the first rock bands that I ever listened to. When I was a kid, I had the Red and Blue albums. That was my introduction to the band. So the album I want to talk about is an album that was released in 1977. I didn't have it when I was younger, so I never really knew it existed. But back in the 70s, people were interested in the Beatles. There was a big market for bootlegs. Not only that, vinyl records were becoming popular again. Therefore, Capitol Records wanted to maintain control and profit of this. Let me talk about a few of the major Beatles releases during the mid-70s. And the first one was mentioned in my intro, and those are the Red and Blue albums. These albums were big. They were albums that everyone was buying because they were albums that showed the Beatles looking like young kids with a clean-cut image on one album, and they had that older, scruffier look on the second album, and the picture was taken from the same angle. It's basically everything you needed as a starter point to get into the band. I started with these two albums. I was only about 8 years old, so I think that's a good starting point. And supposedly the albums were released as a response to a bootleg called Alpha Omega that was around at the time. Then in 1976, they released another album called Rock and Roll Music. To be honest with you, I had never heard this album before doing the research for this video. Even the album cover didn't look familiar to me. But this was a compilation that was released in 1976. It was a way to tap into the popularity of 1950s rock and roll at the time. This compilation was a mix of Lennon McCartney originals as well as many cover versions of classic rock and roll tracks, as the band did a lot of those in the early days. The album was also very successful as it peaked at number 2 in the US. It was also fairly controversial as the former Beatles themselves didn't like it. Ringo Starr felt the album cover made him look cheap, and George Martin hated the sound quality at first, so he had to rework the tapes. There were also a lot of bootlegs floating around at this time, especially in the late 70s. The first Beatles bootleg was called Come Back, and it appeared around January 1970, which included rough stereo mixes of unreleased songs. There were lots of others that included live recordings, concerts, taped radio broadcasts like the Hollywood Bowl or Shea Stadium shows, as well as other unused takes and studio chatter. There were also a lot of performances recorded for BBC programs that were never officially released. There's also the 1962 audition tape that led to them being rejected by Decca Records. And in an age where AI music didn't exist, there were people who found ways to fabricate fake Beatles songs for the purposes of bootlegs. All these bootlegs had really bad sound quality, but people bought them. They were a way to fill a void for Beatles fans, which is kind of strange, considering most of the members were releasing music as solo artists during the 70s. But with all these bootlegs, Capitol and EMI Records responded to this need by releasing authorized compilations as a strategy to reclaim the market and ensure that profits from the band's material flowed through official channels. Vinyl records were also selling in the late 70s, as it was a few years before CDs were introduced to the market. Capitol knew this, as vinyl records had a higher profit margin than singles. So it brings us to the album question, which is Love Songs. Was this album a cash grab? In 1977, Capitol released Love Songs, which was seen as a way to capitalize on the demand for new Beatles releases. The album didn't have any or new unreleased material, just a carefully planned compilation designed to appeal to a specific demographic. As the title suggests, Love Songs is a double LP, a selection of the Beatles' existing tracks, all centered around love and romance. There were no previously unreleased songs, alternate takes, or new recordings. The album was a compilation of softer ballads from the career, including early Beatles and the later Beatles material before they broke up. One of the most notable aspects of this album was the packaging. The version I have is made in Mexico, but the presentation is mostly the same, with the exception of the Spanish song title translations. The album featured a leather look gatefold, meant to look like an old leather-bound book with the gold embossed letters. There's supposed to be a booklet included, but my copy was bought used, so I don't have it. I have the paper sleeves that the records came in. My copy was also distributed by EMI and not Capitol, so I guess EMI distributed the albums to the Latin American market. The labels on the records have that browny yellow dual tone image. The album was a commercial success. It peaked at number 24 on the Billboard Top LPs and Tapes chart in the US and was eventually certified triple platinum by the RIAA. But despite this, it was met with mixed reactions from critics and fans. A lot of critics and fans labeled it as style over substance for the following reasons. The first reason was the most obvious one, that there was not any previously unreleased material. It was a letdown for collectors as they didn't see the need for an album that had songs they already owned. It was seen as a way to just repackage the hits. Another reason that people criticized it was the fact that the collection of songs seemed to be kind of random and that it lacked a cohesive feel. Then there were a few complaints with the audio quality in some of the pressings. For example, some of the tracks had the left and right channels reversed. Some of the tracks from the Rubber Soul album, including Girl in My Life, Michelle and Norwegian Wood, appeared in slightly narrowed stereo, and some other tracks, which included Yes It Is, This Boy, and P.S. I Love You, used duphonic mixes, which means they used reprocessed mono for stereo effect. This might not have bothered the casual listener, but the audiophiles didn't like it. Despite these criticisms, the album's commercial success proved that a new Beatles album could still sell in a time when the band was not making any more new music. I would say many people bought it as a gift, so in terms of marketing, it did pretty well. While Love Songs faced criticism upon release for being a cash grab and for its lack of new material, many collectors still think the album is worth owning in their collection. A lot of people are discovering the album for the first time, myself included, as I had never heard of this album before I bought it. Physical media is also making a comeback, and people today appreciate the album art, the packaging, the leather-bound look of the album, so people also like the gatefold presentation with the image in the middle. Collectors also see this as a way of having all the best love songs and ballads by the Beatles in one place. It's a good place to do a deep dive into the Beatles ballads. The album has lots of deep cuts. It's not just a collection of hit songs. There are songs that never really got a lot of attention, such as I'll Be Back and It's Only Love. So new listeners might discover these songs and then later discover the original albums. And finally, it's seen as a collector's item. I did a quick search on eBay. I found that most copies were between $15 and $40, and then there were some of the yellow variants going for up to about $150. So keep in mind, I'm also looking on the Mexican eBay site. So was Love Songs a cash grab? Yeah, maybe, but it was also a beautifully packaged time capsule that introduced a whole new generation to the Beatles' softer side, and for collectors and fans of physical media, still holds a lot of charm today. But let me know what you think. Was this just a marketing ploy, or does it offer something meaningful for Beatles fans? Check out this video I did on Rubber Soul, where I talk more about how there were two different versions from both Capitol and the Parlophone versions. Let me know your thoughts and comments. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you don't miss any future deep dives into classic rock albums. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.